Two themes dominate our readings today. There is the theme of priesthood that is developed in the letter to the Hebrews. And there is the theme of fasting that is taken up by John's disciples and the Pharisees' disciples as a point of debate with Jesus. In the first reading, we are told that every high priest is taken from humanity and is appointed among God's people, so that he may be their mediator in their relations with God. And the work of a priest is spelled out. He offers gifts and sacrifices for sins. In doing so, he can sympathize with God's people, from whom he is chosen, because he shares in their weaknesses. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews calls Christ a priest. And this would have puzzled many who heard him or read him at the time. We know that in Judaism, priesthood is descended from the tribe of Levi, or Zadok the priest. And yet, Jesus came from no priestly family. However, the writer has the courage to call Christ the high priest. He will have reasons to justify why he calls Christ the high priest. He goes back to the earliest traditions in Judaism, and he finds the figure of Melchizedek, a man who is a fascinating character. We know nothing of Melchizedek's beginnings, and we know nothing of his endings in terms of life. And yet what we know is that when Abraham was coming from Bethel, he met this pagan priest who offered bread and wine. And in acknowledgement of the offering that was made, Abraham gave him a tithe of his wealth. And Melchizedek disappears from the scene. He is never to be heard of. And the letter to the Hebrews, drawing inspiration from that, says, such is the priesthood of Christ. He is made a priest by God. He is at the service of God. And his priesthood, however, is also unique in that Christ never went into the temple to offer sacrifices. If anything, we can count the number of times when Christ visited the temple. And yet he did offer the most pleasing sacrifice to God. He offered himself as the sacrifice to God. And he says, during his life on earth, Christ offered up prayer and entreaty, aloud and in silent tears, to one who had the power to save him out of death. And yet he submitted so humbly that his prayer was heard. It was through obedience, through suffering, that Christ was made perfect. And therefore he has become the source of salvation. He is the priest of the highest order, the order of Melchizedek of old. And the gospel fasting becomes a bone of contention. Whereas others see this mortification as part and parcel of their ministry, Jesus hardly calls anyone to fast. And yet, we know that he did fast. What reasons had he not to call people to fast? The Messianic times were spoken of as a time of feasting, a banquet, a feast. And Jesus says, no one goes to a feast and he fasts there. And yet the time will come when the bridegroom is taken away and people will not fasting. My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, Jesus then goes on to utter statements that more or less help people to understand the reasons behind his actions. He speaks of those who are involved in wine making. And he says when they make wine, new wine is put in fresh skins, so that when it does ferment, it does not tear off the skins, and the wine is wasted. That's a parable about Jesus himself. He is the new wine that needs new wineskins. He cannot be understood if people still wear the same thinking cap as they had before his advent. For us to understand Jesus, we have to put on the mind of Christ. We, as it were, have to humble ourselves and learn from him.